Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ignorant Intellectual on Media. Today, I thought we would do the next episode in my CD library, which would be episode 10, if I remember correctly. And we're right into the A's now. We're at the bottom of the first box that I opened and went through after I took all my CDs off my shelving to make more room for my films. So we started with the C's, which were at the top of the box, and we got to the B's, which were at the middle of the box. Now we're at the bottom of the box with the A's and the numbers and the symbols, right? So um, I picked out 20 or took 20 out of the box, and let's go through them, see what I found. All right. So first up is a British singer that probably everybody on the whole planet knows, and her name is Adele, and I have her first three albums. All right. So number 19, which is her first, which came out in 2008. Then 21, which came out in 2011, and then 25, which came out in 2015. Basically, uh, it's her age that she put as the title of her album. So she was 19 when she did her first one. She was 21 when she did her second, and 25 when she did her third. Right. So um, most people know Adele if it wasn't from her first album, from like Chasing Pavements or Make You Feel My Love, was her second album. That's when I um, heard of Adele and her song um, "Someone Like You." That is an incredibly good song. All right, so I think everybody has been through something like that where um, you have a breakup, but you're still in love with the other person, and because you love them so much, you really want them back. But if you can't have them back, you want them to be with somebody that'll make them happy because that's how much you love them, or whatever. It's a very, very emotional and sentimental song, right? And she kind of copied that in her third album with Hello, which was the big single off of her 25 album, her third album, which came out in 2015. And after that, I kind of, soured a bit on Adele. I go, okay, two albums is good enough for me with her. Um, but it was this one. This one is one of the greatest selling albums of all time. I think with my research, it's sold over 30 million albums. All right, and that's up there. That's up there with Hotel California by the Eagles, and like like Thriller by the Beatles. Sorry, Thriller by Michael Jackson, or Sergeant Pepper's by the Beatles, or up there when it comes to sales or whatever, right? So um, it was a great album. I listened to it numerous times, but I was actually brought into Adele not because of Adele, but because of Amy Winehouse. You guys should know who Amy Winehouse is. Right? So Amy Winehouse is the singer that came before Adele, and she was the one that, it seems to me, I could be wrong. Maybe a music historian or musicologist can correct me if they're watching this video. But me being in Canada and me being listening to a lot of music in the early 2000s, um, the turn of the millennium, right? So um, I started listening to Amy Winehouse because she brought vocal jazz back into the mainstream. All right, so at least that's my look or take on it. That's what happened to me. Basically, I love female vocal jazz. I'd listen to people like Molly Johnson or Diane Krall, Diana Krall in Canada, or internationally others, but mostly those two because I'm in Canada. But when Amy Winehouse came on the scene with uh, with Frank, and what was her other album? Anyways, I'll put the two albums up here. Those two albums, it brought like jazz vocals, soul, R&B kind of feel vocals into the mainstream, and it's still there. I mean, uh, so many people listen to like neo soul and soul, basic soul or R&B and B and everything. It's along with hip hop, it's become like the mainstream. At least if my children and my friends' musical tastes are atypical. Anyway, so um, but it was, for me, it was Amy Winehouse that brought that jazz vocal back into vogue and into the mainstream. And because of that, I think uh, that's why Adele became so successful. Now, like I said, if you're a musicologist, then maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but I know Amy Winehouse came out before Adele, and Amy Winehouse ended up having two great albums, and she had a third one posthumously. Is that how you pronounce it? Ignorant intellectual. Um, uh, and she died of alcohol poisoning at 27. Like, is that become cliche for you or what? Like, I'm in my 50s and it's become cliche the number of artists that end up. It's like 27 is the age that they end up, dying. Or what was Janis Joplin 27? Kurt Cobain was 27. Jimi Hendrix was 27, wasn't he? You know, Jim Morrison was 27. It's like it started off as a coincidence that these rock stars are all dying at 27, but I think it's become like every rock star afterwards saying, let's add to it and let's die at 27 or something, like it's some sort of rite of passage or something. Anyways, it's a bit crazy. Anyway, um, so she ends up dying of alcohol poisoning, all right, and or alcohol overdose, whatever, and then Adele's career starts taking off because she doesn't have the exact same cadence or anything like Amy Winehouse does or anything, but she has that kind of like female jazz vocal to her music, right, and to her sound. So people just kind of went from Amy Winehouse into Adele, and then Adele just blew the hell up, right? So I don't know. I think Adele maybe um, owes a bit of thanks to Amy Winehouse. And if you haven't listened to Amy Winehouse, but you have listened to Adele, I would suggest you go back a few years earlier and just pick up some Amy Winehouse, Frank, and what's the other one? Uh, um, back Back to Black is that the other one? I can't remember the name of the other album. Like I said, I put it up there a little bit, right? So um, anyway, so that's Adele. Adele is one of the most successful female British singers in history. That's how um, much people listen to her music. But if you haven't listened to Adele, I would suggest 21. I think that one is probably her best album. The other ones, this one is probably her second best, and this one her third best. I haven't listened to her fourth album because I kind of moved on. But that's Adele. All right, so that's Adele. Next up is Air, which is a French duo, a French band. All right, two people, electronic artists. I don't know if you've heard them or not, but I have three of their albums here. All right, so um, I always put stickers on the albums. It just with um, a bit of information, the date, the year that it came out, what you get stuck in your head, ignorant intellectual, which studio album it is, and so on and so forth. All right, so I have three of them. Right, so I have Virgin Suicides, which is basically the soundtrack to the Sofia Coppola movie. And if you haven't seen that movie, that is a really good movie, and um, it made Sofia Coppola one of my favorite directors, and I collect all of her stuff because of it. Right. So, all right. So anyway, it's called Virgin Suicide, and the band is named Air. If I didn't mention that. All right. So it's a duo from France, a French duo. All right. So that's 2000. Then in 2001, this is their second studio album after Moon Safari, and it's 10,000 Hertz Legends came out in 2001, and then I have their fifth album, which is called Love 2, and it came out in 2009. All right, so basically they're an electronic band, right? So um, where I got into them was a recommendation from an online friend to listen to Moon Safari, and I did back in 1998, and that album blew me away, and it's became one of my all-time favorite, top 10, top 20 albums, right? If you haven't listened to Moon Safari, I'll put it up here. Find it, pick it up. It's basically It's great to just listen to in the background if you're doing stuff. It's great to fall asleep to. It just makes you feel like you're floating in space. It's really 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 good. All right, and nothing they've done since that one has lived up to it. Closest is probably this one. All right, and this one is still a pale comparison. All right, so but if you like electronic music, ambient, floaty type of space type of um, electronic music, you'll really enjoy Air. They're extremely good. All right, so those are three of their albums. All right, um, what's up next here? All right, next up is Tori Amos, and I have two of her albums. Now, I never really got into Tori Amos much. You know what I mean? I have her first album, which is called Little Earthquakes, and then I have her seventh album, which is called Scarlet's Walk. All right, now Scarlet's Walk is basically came out in 2002, so a decade after her first album. This is basically post 9/11, and it's what she quote called a sonic novel about a road trip. All right, so sounds kind of interesting. Now Tori Amos, and others like Jane Siberry, or probably the best of that kind of music, with a piano or um, female vocal with piano or with other instruments, and a bit eclectic in the music, and the vocals are a bit higher or whatever. It's like Kate Bush is probably the best of that kind of music, but she's not bad either. I got into Kate Bush, but I didn't get into her. It's just later on I've been picking up her albums and listening to her, and I'm kind of getting into her now, but 20 years, 30 years later, right? So anyways, if you're going to listen to Tori Amos, I started with this one, which is her first, and this one, her first album, put her on the map. And I don't know if she's ever achieved that greatness like she did on this first album. Um, but if you're a big Tori Amos fan, you tell me, because I'm not a huge fan of hers. Right? So, all right, so that's Tori Amos. Next up after that is Akron Family. And this is their first album from 2005. It's a self-titled album. Now, this album came with that collection of 500 CDs that I bought off that lady. If you follow the episodes, you'll know that a couple of years back I picked up like 500 CDs of like folk and alternative rock and stuff that's a little bit out of the ordinary, not as much mainstream, and um, more recent, like in the 2000s, like the late 90s to 2010. The girl that I bought this off had like a huge collection of music from that time, from like indie bands, right? Not mainstream bands. And this was one of them that came with it, and this is another one. All right. So this is their official first album. All right, and it's basically folk, electronica, and other. They're kind of like almost schizophrenic. Almost, they add so many different sounds to their stuff, but it's good to listen to. I haven't really gotten into them very much. Maybe you have. You tell me. Um, so this is their first one, came out 2005, and this one I have no idea what it is. It looks like maybe the girl went to a concert by them and they were handing these out. Um, I don't know if it's kind of like a bootleg or what, but basically it has 24 songs on it. All right, it's a CD or whatever, 24 songs on it, and it says collected with love from recordings made between 2002 and 2005 at home and other places by Akron family, Ryan, Dana, Seth, Miles, and sometimes Ed. Thanks, MG, Ed, Dave Smith, and everyone else. You know who you are. All right. So basically, it looks like it's a homemade CD from the group or whatever. Maybe they handed these out at some of their concerts or whatever. But basically, it's like almost like a bootleg CD. All right. So I've not listened to it. So all right. Next up is maybe we should call this episode the episode of small artists that nobody knows, because so many, well, a lot of them are local, right? So if you're in the city, you probably know them, but if you're not, maybe you would know them, like these guys or this guy especially, all right? So I'm guessing that you probably haven't heard of this guy, and I wouldn't have heard of this guy unless I was in the city of Ottawa when he was touring or whatever, right? Um, so he's an Ottawa local Ottawa artist, all right. His name is Trevor Alguire, and he plays kind of like a country rock, country type of bluegrass, old style country, right? And this is his album from 2006. It's called As of Yesterday, and this is his album from 2012, and it's called Till Sorrow Begins to Call. Right? I mean, it's basic like straightforward bluegrass kind of country stuff. And if you ever visit Ottawa, which I did, all right, and go around to the local music venues. Barrymore's is pretty big in Ottawa. Now this is going back, like a decade or so. So, um, and there's other venues, and like Barrymore's. Did I just mention that? Anyways, they have a bunch of different venues where you can listen to live music. I mean, it's not as big as Toronto or Montreal. Those scenes are a lot larger, and there's a lot more venues and bigger areas to play and listen to music. So that's why you get like um, a large a large amount of, at least since the turn of the millennium, a large amount of the bands that are coming out of Canada are coming from the Montreal or Toronto scene, right? You don't hear a lot of Ottawa stuff, but if you're in the eastern part of Canada, not on the east coast, but if you're in the eastern part of Canada, that corridor of Montreal, Ottawa, Toronto, you can listen to some pretty friggin' good music, and Ottawa shouldn't be excluded from that. The problem is that they make great music, but um, it's rare to see any of them end up getting out of their own city, right? So, but if you're in Montreal or you're in Toronto, you will be able to listen to music from Ottawa, because that's, if you're in that area, um, you should be able to find some Ottawa music. And Trevor Alguire is one of the greats from the early 2000s. I mean, it's the mid 2000s, right? So Jim Bryson is another guy that's really good. I picked up an LP from a punk band that was really good at the time when I was going around. With my job, I'd be moving around from cities or whatever, right? So, um, uh, another was a short-lived band. What the hell was the name of them? I still have their LP. It was Thank You for Your Daughters was the name of the album. The Weapons of Mass Seduction was a punk band from Ottawa that was really good. Um, Too bad they only came out with two LPs, or one LP and one CD, if I remember correctly. Anyway, so if you're in the Ottawa area and you go, because that's what I do as well, is in the Ottawa area, or in Toronto, wherever you end up going around, and you go to the different music shops. And I mean, not so much in Toronto or Montreal, because those bands that become successful end up becoming successful internationally as well. Um, but let's say in Ottawa, if you want to, you know, uh, try out the local music, you can go to different CD or record stores, and sometimes they'll have a section on local music or whatever. And then what I did was just randomly pick, some stuff from the local scene or whatever. Because um, what I learned over my 50 plus years of listening to music is that um, groups that are internationally famous and considered great, a lot of the times, the reason why they're that way is because they had the proper promotion, right? I mean, they're good. I mean, you have to be good in the first place, but then you need the promotion to end up becoming huge, right? And what you'll notice is that you can even go down to the local level, the city level of music, and listen to music, and you realize that some of these, another band was in Ottawa that I ended up coming across, country band, the Black Boot Trio is another one that's really good, and you wonder why they didn't become successful internationally or successful at least Canadian wise, right? And the reason why is it's a side project from a person that's an electrician or an engineer or something like that, um, and they don't want to go on the road and they don't want to do anything more than locally, right? It's more of a hobby than a calling or whatever, right? Um, so yeah, but what you realize when you go into, let's say, Toronto, and you pick up the local scene in Toronto, or you go to Montreal and pick up the local scene in Montreal or Ottawa or Calgary or Vancouver, like the punk scene in Vancouver back in the 80s and the 90s was extremely good, right? So um, what you realize is that there are thousands and thousands of musicians that are just as good as musicians that everybody knows. It's just that they either um, that wasn't what their pursuit in life was going to be, or they enjoy it, but like I said, it's like a hobby, or they just didn't get the proper breaks or whatever, right? Or whatever. And the music scene is so small now. It's like if you want to act and be in a movie that everybody's going to see around the world, you're not going to be doing it from Montreal or Toronto. You have to go to LA, right? Even you can't even go to New York. You have to go to LA. You have to end up in that small area of the world in order to become Hugh Jackman or something like that, right? Um, so you may get noticed in your native country, but if you want to become internationally famous, you have to go to LA. And a lot of that homogenization is happening in music and everywhere else. I mean, you turn on the radio. It doesn't matter if you're in Manila, you're in Los Angeles, you're in New York, you're in Kuala Lumpur. It doesn't matter. You're going to hear fucking. I was a perfect example is I was introduced to Bruno Mars when I was in Manila. Um, that song he had a what was the name of that song? Um, I think I want to marry you. Remember that song? I think I want to marry you. The first time I heard that song or any Bruno Mars song, I wasn't in Canada. I was in Manila. I was traveling, right? Um, so the gentleman's an American, right? And he's being played in Manila. And in Canada, once you hear a song, then now I'm back in Canada, and now, oh, that's a Bruno Mars song. Oh, that's a Bruno Mars song, right? You didn't pick up on it before, right? So basically, it's um, so much of the music that people listen to. They're listening to the same music, but it's a worldwide thing. So it's not like you're going to get a lot of bands and a lot of groups are not going to become famous, right? They're not going to be because there's only a small amount of people that end up being that way, and it's done on a worldwide scale, right? It's not done um, more locally anymore. So if you're going to listen to local music, if you're going to listen to music, then you have to actually be in that locale to listen to it a lot of the times because the distribution isn't going to happen, right? So the mainstream, labels are, you know, they don't think success is like if you do well um, in New York or something, or if you do well in L.A. No, the success is has to be international, right? In order for you to be quote unquote successful, you have to sell, like worldwide kind of thing, right? So anyway, so end of my rant. But what I'm saying is, what you'll notice is if you do get more into local music, and I really like the Ottawa scene back in the 2000s, and the Toronto scene and the Montreal scene, there was like a renaissance of really good music in the turn of the millennium or whatever, right? And a lot of the bands that came out of Montreal and Toronto ended up becoming, big, but none of the Ottawa bands did. So it's kind of interesting. Anyway, um, uh, so that's Trevor Alguire. All right. So he was a local Ottawa guy who had a band together and put out a lot of like you know classical country music, right? With the pedal steel guitars and all that kind of stuff. It's really interesting. And when I was in Ottawa, I would come to Ottawa, um, when I would know when he was playing, I would go see a few of his stuff, a few of his concerts as well. Him, Jim Bryson, the Black Boot Trio, who else? Weapons of Mass Seduction. These are all, when I was traveling more in the early 2000s or whatever, and I would come across these bands. And you pick up a CD at the concert or whatever, and you realize this is really good music. I mean, um, like I said, you don't have to be internationally famous to be considered good, right? So, anyways, all right. So that's Trevor Alguire from Ottawa. Next up is uh, Bachman Turner Overdrive's fourth album, all right, which is called Four Wheel Drive, and this is the album that has "Hey You" on it, right? That ode to Burton Cummings or whatever you want to call it an ode, all right. But a lot of this music, this isn't as good as what was the album that came before this? Not Fragile. I think it's Not Fragile, isn't it? Yeah, not Fragile, right? And during those sessions, they had extra music that they didn't put on Not Fragile, so they ended up having this album. And um, Not Fragile came out and became a big success in Canada. I don't know as much international, but I know it's huge in Canada. And then the record company wanted to take advantage of that popularity, so they had them put out this album like really soon afterwards, within like 6 to 8 months, I think it was. It was less than a year, anyways. That this album came out after the other one, if I remember correctly, maybe a year. And and so a lot of the music that wasn't put on Not Fragile was put on Four Wheel Drive. All right, so this is a classic Canadian rock album, and uh, Bachman Turner Overdrive, along with the Guess Who and Steppenwolf and all these other guys are classic Canadian rock, right? So all right, so that's Four Wheel Drive. Next up is Erykah Badu. Is that how you pronounce her last name? Um, I was put on her by a friend, and so I picked up this one, which is her first. All right, and basically she's, what do they call her? The queen of neo soul. All right, but I never really got much into her. I was more into, who was another, Lauren Hill. Lauren Hill is probably the person that I really went to first. I never really picked up on her until later on, and I think this is the only album I have of hers. I listened to it for a bit, and it's nice. It's mellow, neo soul. It's really really good. But if you like neo soul, you're gonna like her. Um, although, what is neo soul? Is it soul? Is it R&B? What the fuck is it? Right? All these little terms that music people call, right? It's just uh, it's confusing to try to understand what they mean by it. Anyway, so that's neo soul queen Erykah Badu. All right. Next up is a Canadian DJ who uh, became famous out of the Detroit scene, the Windsor, Detroit scene. And his name is, it's really hard to pronounce his name, but it's John Aquaviva. Aquaviva. John Aquaviva. And basically, he had his own a couple of record labels, and he put out a bunch of music. But this is put out by Yule Records. I think they're out of Montreal, Yule Records. And this is called Connected, the John Aquaviva mix. All right. So I guess he mixed a bunch of songs that either were his or weren't his. I'm not sure. Anyways, I don't know a lot about the gentleman because I never really got into the EDM house music as much as I do get into the more of the ambient, slower type of electronic music. But I do listen to it, and I do, like Fatboy Slim, really good. Those guys, Massive Attack, those guys back in the in the '90s, whatever. Now this came out in 2001, so this would be my introduction to Aquaviva if I well, once I come to the flash drive. If I mentioned that I put most of the music I have on CD onto flash drives and listen to it in my car. All right, so once I come across it, I'll listen to it. Next up is a Canadian band that basically uh, put screamo on the map in Canada, maybe even worldwide. I don't know. Post-hardcore. What do you call it? Alexisonfire or Alex is on fire? No, it's called Alexisonfire. It's basically there was a girl named Alexisonfire Alexisonfire, who's like a porn star, and they took that name from her or whatever and put Alexis on Fire, right? So, and this is their first album, all right? It's a self-titled album, came out in 2002, and basically, it's one of the post-hardcore screamo albums that if you want to get into that genre of music, this is one of the albums that you're going to pick up pretty quickly, right? So, um, I like screamo, but it's not really, huge on my list of music to listen to. It's true that as you get older, the less and less um, experimental you are with music or accepting you are with music. You want more mellow type of music. That's why older people get into classical and jazz music, and you get away from like metal and hardcore music or whatever, right? Punk and that kind of thing. Now I still listen to punk. I still listen to garage, but the really hardcore stuff, that driving death metal kind of shit. Well, I shouldn't call it shit because I did listen to it for a while. It's not bad or whatever, but screamo is kind of, they really want to listen to a guy yelling at you, right? So as you get older, that nerve in your that nerve is like easily plucked as you get older, right? So anyway, so that's Alexisonfire. Next up is Ian Anderson, the singer and creator for Jethro Tull, and he came out with this Tab 2, or Thick as a Brick 2, and basically it's like Thick as a Brick, the Jethro Tull album came out, what, in 1972, and this one came out when? In 2012. So 40 years later, Ian Anderson came out with a sequel to that classic Jethro Tull. It's probably their second best album behind Aqualung. Um, if you want to listen to, like progressive rock type of thing with a flute, all right, which you don't really hear all that often, then Jethro Tull might be up your alley. And like Thick as a Brick and Aqualung are probably their two best albums. Anyway, so this is 40 years later, and it's basically um, so Thick as a Brick was put out, and it has this, if you had the LP or whatever, you would fold it open, and then if you looked at it, it was like a newspaper, like front page of a newspaper or newspaper thing with a bunch of articles on it, and it's about this 8-year-old kid. What was his name? Um, Gerald Bostock. All right, and supposedly the music on Thick as a Brick was thought up by this 8-year-old genius named what was his name again? Gerald Bostock. Right. So this is 40 years later, and Ian Anderson is in the studio or whatever, and he's thinking, wonder whatever happened to this fictional character of Gerald Bostock, and 40 years later he came out with this album to answer that question, right? So it looks like a modern version of Thick as a Brick as a newspaper, and there's no newspapers anymore. It's all online newspapers, right? So there you got www.stcleve.com or whatever, and then you have all the articles. So it looks like a web page newspaper, right? And then you have the music on it. I have not listened to it, so I'm not sure if it's as good as Thick as a Brick, but we'll see when I listen to it. Have you listened to it? What do you think of it? All right, so next up is a dance punk outfit um, uh, called, what do you call it? It's like an exclamation point, and an exclamation point is the name of the band. All right, so they say it's pronounced chick, 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 chick. All right, chick, chick, chick. Is see if you notice it here. Anyways, this is a single. It's not one of their main albums. It's a single, and the single is called "Me and Giuliani Down by the Schoolyard: A True Story." All right. So basically, it has two songs on it. It has that one, and the second one, which is called "Intensa Fielder Sun Ra Capella," and yeah, try to pronounce it. Good luck. All right. It's Intensa Fielder Sun Ra Capel Electro-ship. Okay, good luck with that. Anyways, they're basically, dance punk, disco. You got a disco feel to it, kind of like rock, punk, disco, all mixed in together, and it's basically one of their singles. It was in that group of 500 or so CDs that I got off that girl, so I have not listened to it. Have you ever listened to Chick Chick Chick? It's funny just saying it. All right, so next up is All-Time Quarterback, which is this is uh, his EP. It's basically Ben Gibbard, from Death Cab for Cutie, and he's in another band. I can't remember it. I'll put it down here. What's the name of the other band? Anyway, so his main was he's the lead singer and writer for Death Cab for Cutie. And his side project he called All Time Quarterback. And this is basically one of the EPs that he put out, but it's not actually. It's basically what was the name of it? Barsuck Records. Barsuck Records took that EP that he put out on his own, and there was a second EP that he had as well, which was called uh, the Envelope Sessions, and basically they combined those two EPs into one album, and they still called it, the self-titled All Time Quarterback, right? So if you like Death Cab for Cutie, you'll probably like this, and if you haven't heard Death Cab from Cutie or All Time Quarterback, um, look at the album. What is the name of that album? Signs? Is it Signs? Plans. Plans. All right. So look up Death Cab for Cutie Plans. That's probably their best album. That came out in like 2005, and I'll put it here, right? So look for that album and see what you think. He's got really good, unique kind of voice, and propelled me to listen. I picked up a whole bunch of their albums because of it and listened to them. All right. Next up is America, their 1975 greatest hits package. All right. Pretty simply, oh, probably about 10%, maybe 10%, maybe 5%, maybe 5% of my collection of CDs are CDs um, that I've bought in other people's collections, right? So let's say, for example, let's say you're looking for a certain few albums or whatever, or you want to expand your CD library, and so you're looking around for stuff on Facebook Marketplace or whatever, and you see a guy's getting rid of his whole collection of, let's say, 600 or 700 albums or 100 albums or whatever CDs, and you look at it and maybe there's 20 or 30 of them that you want, but you can't convince them to sell you those 20 or 10 of it. No, they're selling it as a whole group, right? So you lowball him and he takes it, and then you take the whole collection off of him because you don't really want most of it. You only want the certain ones. But if you're going to have to take all the rest of it, then you're going to want it as a cheap price, right? So then what you do with the other stuff that you don't want is you basically repackage it and sell it, right? So when your CD library or any type of library expands, whether it's your movie library or CD library, your LP library, or whatever, what happens is over time is there's less and less um, that you don't already have, right? So at the beginning, let's say you're buying movies, and you see a guy has like 300 DVDs or Blu-rays, and he's selling it for like $200 or whatever, and you look at it, and because you have no movies in your collection yet, you'll have a lot of the titles that you're looking to collect, right? So maybe of the, let's say you sell like 600 of them or 500 of them, maybe like 75% of them are movies that you would add to your collection because you have none in your collection yet, right? Um, so then you add them. But what happens is once you hit like 4 or 5, 6,000 movies, um, when you're looking at these collections, you'll see that most of them you already have in your collection, and there's only going to be a few. So let's say 3 years down the road, you now have 5,000 films in your collection, and now somebody puts up a collection of 500 uh, DVDs and Blu-rays, and you look through it, and there are a lot of good movies, but most of those movies you have already, and maybe out of those 500, you only need 20, right? Maybe out of 500, there's only 20 of them that you want to get. Maybe of those 20, there's 5 of them that you've been looking for a long time, and they're difficult to find. So you end up buying the whole collection because it won't sell you those individual ones. No, I'm not interested in cherry picking, letting people cherry pick the collection. I just want to get rid of the whole collection. So then you end up buying the whole collection um, just to get those 20 items, right? And then with the 480 other ones, you sell them off, and hopefully you get the money that you paid back for them. Or maybe you'll make a bit of money. You never know. It depends on how well you are able to package and resell them, right? So, but the main purpose is that you end up having to do that a lot of the times because it's the only time you ever come across certain films that you're looking for. Like there may be a film or a CD that you've been looking for like 5 years and you just can't find it. Um, and you can't buy it new, it's out of print or whatever, right? Um, so you end up buying a big collection just to get a few, right? And what happens is your collection expands and then you sell, and what you don't sell, you still have, and you still have it in your collection. And that would be something like this, right? So I bought a large collection off a guy of CDs, and this ends up being one of them. I have no interest. I like America as a band, but I'd rather have their collection of albums or whatever. I don't like greatest hits packages much, but they end up, you can't avoid them. They end up in your collection over time because people don't go searching out, like with the older bands, people don't go searching out. I mean, when CD collecting was a thing to collect, rather than just going on Spotify or iTunes that people do now, right? Um, people, greatest hits packages, those 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 CDs were extremely popular because people don't want to delve into a band's, like most people don't want to delve into a band's discography. They just want to have the songs they heard on the radio or whatever, and usually that comes with the greatest hits package, or somebody maybe was recommended, so they go out and they don't want to like buy one album. They want to see what the music is like, so they want their best stuff, so they get a greatest hits package, right? So you can't really avoid greatest hits packages. You end up having them in your collection no matter what you do, right? Um, so this is America's greatest hits package. They're the guys known for my horse with no name and a bunch of other ones. They're all on this album, right? So came out in 1975. All right, and last but not least is Alcest or Alcest. What do you call it? Alcest, Alcest. All right, and this is their album. Stop en français, okay. Souvenir de notre monde. All right, memories from another world. I guess it's called. I mean, um, and it's basically black gaze. Have you ever heard of the subgenre of black gaze or post-hardcore? I guess you would call it, like emo, but hardcore emo. Emo, but like black metal, but emo. Anyways, it's like how particular like these music journalists are like. You gotta identify music, and if it's just a little bit different than other music that they've heard, they got to give it a new label, right? And then there's like 5 million different labels for music, right? It's like, you know what I mean? Anyways, so this is what's called a post black metal band or black gaze. All right, but basically what it is metal. All right, and it's from a French group, and this album came out in 2007, and it is their first. All right, so I have not listened to this album, um, and not a lot of black metal or post black metal or emo core or whatever you want to call it comes across my field of vision or my desk or whatever. But this was in a collection that I bought off of that girl, and so now it's part of my collection until I listen to it and decide whether I like it. And if I don't, I'll get rid of it. If I do, I'll keep it. Right. Um, all right. So that's the 20. I think it's 20 CDs. Anyways, I usually count by 20. Right. And I hope you enjoyed the album. The album. Hope you enjoyed the video. And if you did, leave a thumbs up. Think about subscribing if you so choose. I would appreciate it. And you have a great day, and I'll talk to you in my next video. And bye for now.